Let's share some gratitudes, given that it's been a while since we've seen each other. Cora, do you want to start us off?
Um, I'm reading a book. I've been reading it over several sessions called Writing Down the Bones. And it's by Goldberg. And she has some really interesting exercises.
Mm.
And I've kind of been inspired by her writing and by what they're just short chapters, just suggestions I've never heard of before. And it's been really interesting how my writing has changed and how I'm just able to do it. One of the exercises that she does is you take verbs and you write them down, and then you take adjectives that are completely opposite to the verbs. And then you start matching them together. So like driving computers, or the mouse is the wheel is in control of the steering wheel. And all of a sudden, all these different things happen. And because they're nonsensical for me, I don't think. And that's what she suggests is you just write. And
Mm-mm.
so some of the stuff that's been coming out is just, I have to laugh at it. It's funny. So that's my gratitude.
Nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Persis, how about you?
My gratitude is the loving kindness practice that I've been doing since I did my retreat at the beginning of December,
Mm.
and how I kind of, not every day, but like sometimes I'm like, that's a response because of the practice I'm doing. I find
Mm.
it so inspiring. So it's like, yeah. So I've kind of made a commitment to do this for 3 months, and we'll see how it goes. And I had a kind of email with one of my Buddhist teachers, and I just was telling him what I'm doing now. And he was saying how more and more he's coming back to that, to the really simplest practices, the kind of really fundamental practices, I think, that on a day to day change transform our perceptions and our
Mm.
responses. So, yeah, that's my gratitude.
Thank you. And it's an encouragement, because you're right. It is the small, regular habits that we engage in to change our mind, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Waithera.
Happy New Year again.
Mhm.
Um, I am grateful. I'm grateful to be at home. I'm grateful for rest and to be surrounded by family.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I feel like there's a lot I'm trying to figure out as far as what I want my year to look like or what I want to do. But it's very grounding to just be at home and have family around me.
Mm.
Um, it is a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think my gratitude is um my children are all with their dad for a week. Hallelujah. I was so desperate for a break. Um, so much as I love them, they're at that stage where they're all bickering and it's really tiring. so so I've got complete quiet and it's been amazing. I feel like a student again. So I've got my books all spread out and I've just been out of work, which has been really, really nice. Uh, yeah, small mercies, exactly. Uh, today I thought we would just start to think about groups, and I've just got quite a short presentation, and I'm aware that we kind of race through these ideas around coaching. So next week we're going to sort of think about finding our voice, and that'll be a chance for us to kind of reflect on all the things that we've looked at and how we're going to develop our own practice as end of life planning facilitators. So I thought it would be important to just have a little think about groups. So I will share my presentation. If I can remember how to do it. Okay, here we go. It's a bit slow. Okay, so done our gratitudes. We just look at, the benefits and disadvantages of one-to-one or group facilitation, and then handling group dynamics. And then I've got a little video on how to facilitate a group. And then we'll just switch the presentation off and talk about it. So I was just reflecting on the difference between working one-on-one with a client and working with a group. And when you've got your single client in front of you, you can obviously work specifically on their issues. When you're working with a group, you're generally following a program. When you've just got one client, the energy of the session is dependent on the interaction between you and your client. Whereas when you've got a group, the energy of the session comes from more people. So it can be more energizing potentially, but there's also more potential for it to go in lots of different directions. So you have quite a different role, I think, as a facilitator. And there are obviously lots of additional things to that, but they were the strongest two that came to me. And then from a business front, when you're doing one-on-one sessions, your income is limited to how much you charge per hour. And when you work with a group, that shifts to how many participants you have in a group. So it's a much more scalable business model. And I'm kind of exploring that a little bit more with my grief recovery work at the moment, and offering more groups, just because I need to find a way to scale my business without adding a lot more hours to what I do. So that's a few thoughts about the differences between one-on-one and groups. And then obviously we've got the issue around group dynamics. So these were a really helpful list of suggestions on how to handle group dynamics. And the suggestion is to start by mentally and physically preparing yourself as a facilitator. And I think this is a really helpful recommendation. I find that I just often spend a moment just holding, like, in my mind, the people who are part of my group, and just sort of feeling gratitude for them. And it creates, for me, a kind of connection with the people that I'm working with, and also to physically take care of yourself. It's easy to be quite stretched when you're managing lots of different people. So to remember to eat and to drink, all the basic things, but it can be easy to forget those things when you're very busy. The second point is to create the right environment. And obviously, if you're meeting people in person, that can be to do with the venue that you choose, and then how you set the room up in terms of chairs and kind of lighting and things like that. And I'm a storyteller, and I've got a lovely bell tent, and I spend a lot of time like with these beautiful rugs and cushions and creating this lovely space. And then sometimes when I'm doing something in a hall, even if I can't have the tent up, I often try and recreate that tent-like experience. So I'm known on Tyree for carrying all my cushions around with me so I can create these lovely, colourful environments. So that's something to think about. And the other thing I think, is if you're working on Zoom, you can create presentations like this, and the colours that you use will give an indication of the vibe, or so there's lots of ways that you can create an environment. Or you could invite your participants to light a candle. I've done that sort of thing before, so that you're inviting them to create a particular environment in their physical space. So the next point is to be really clear with your group about what your expected outcomes or objectives for the group are. And that can help you kind of bring the group back. If it starts to veer off, you can say, remember, today we're talking about whatever it is, digital legacy, or whatever subject you're on, and establish expectations. Like some groups I've participated in are kind of working groups. So the expectation is that in the group time, you'll do some of the work. So like in the Marketing for Hippies membership, they have some groups which are clearly teaching, some groups where you're expected to turn off your camera for 20 minutes and create a piece of marketing. So when I joined either of those groups, I know what the expectations are. Energize the group throughout the meeting. You know, if you notice that there's a little bit of a drop in energy, I was doing an end of life planning group last night, and we were talking about the digital legacy, and the whole group was so depressed by the idea that at some point I just like said, you know, I think we're really struggling with this. And they were like, we're okay with death, but with the digital space, like, ugh. And then I don't know, we started to laugh about it and it changed the energy. There was a moment where I was just thinking, oh, we're going to just have to stop this group. It's really like it was really dragging. So energizing the group throughout the meeting, manage participation. And we can talk a little bit about that later. You know, when we think about all the different characters that come to a group, you know, when you've got a course advertised, you don't know who's going to sign up. So you know, this is where your skill as a facilitator comes in to notice when someone's talking a lot and taking up a lot of space, and when someone's not talking very much, and just finding ways to draw them in. And this is where adjusting our facilitation style is really important. And you know, I've noticed that really clearly recently in my grief recovery work. Normally I work with women, and I've just got a very I've got a way of working. I suppose I was thinking it was my way of working, and in the last year I've had a lot more men who've joined my grief recovery work, and it's called for me something quite different because I notice they relate to me very differently. So part of the program is to share our own, for me as a facilitator, to share my own loss history graph. So this is kind of my experience of loss from the beginning of my life. And I notice women often lean in and identify with some of the experiences I've had, whereas men, it evokes a much more protective energy from them. So that demands something quite different from me. So adjusting, you know, I've really noticed how I've become much more directive to respond to that. You know, it invites me to be much clearer that I'm okay, that I don't need them to care for me. And that there'll be things, it's not just around gender, but there'll be things that you'll notice in groups or working with different people that will call something different from you. The next one is the suggestion to provide a variety of group working methods. So if you're working with a bigger group, it could be that if you're working on Zoom, you could offer breakout rooms, or if you're working in person, you invite someone to turn to their neighbor and talk about something, or you could have some kind of exercise that you do. There'll be lots of different ways, but to sort of break up the way the group works, that can bring more energy into the group. So to recognize and reinforce supportive behaviors and responses. And so in that sense, you're wanting to you know, notice and amplify when participants are offering what you're wanting from the group, so that the rest of the group can learn from that. And evaluating the group's success. You know, I think we've talked about reflective practice, and this fits that category. You know, at the end of the session, to look at how it went and just notice what was going well. There's something that wasn't going well for you as a facilitator, and you can also invite feedback and look at what the participants' feedback is. Oh yeah, and I put a little note here to say use the support of our Dandelion community to reflect on any difficulties. You know, it's really helpful to have a community, and we're all here to help each other, because it can be quite draining if you've hosted a group and it feels as if it hasn't gone well, or you've had some challenging feedback. It can feel really demoralizing when you're at the beginning of your journey with this. So bring it to the group, and we can support you to reflect on it. Because actually, when you get difficult feedback or you have a difficult meeting, this is an opportunity for growth and for refining your practice. But it is nonetheless hard when you're self-employed and you're doing this stuff on your own. And at the end of the day, you're home alone with this, and you don't have work colleagues to go to. Call on the Dandelion community, because that's what we're here for. So I've got this little video to play you. It's about 10 minutes long, and she's got lovely energy, and I liked her colors and things. And she had some good things to say about how to facilitate a group. So I'm going to play this.
Welcome to How to Facilitate a Group Discussion. To talk about what are some scenarios that you would need to facilitate a group discussion in. I'm going to talk about some of the ways that group discussions go wrong and get off track. I'll share a little bit about my experience with group discussions, and then I'll share some strategies and tactics for you to become a great facilitator if you're not already. There are lots of reasons to facilitate a group conversation, a group discussion. Sometimes we use them to generate ideas, to brainstorm, to create something new. And often we use them to solve a problem or meet a challenge. Now, the problem is, believe it or not, we have a belief that group discussions are actually more productive than they usually are. Research shows that most of the time, groups don't come up with as great of ideas as individuals, unless the groups are really well facilitated. And in fact, research shows that groups are plagued by lots of problems. Groupthink is one of them. What often happens is a group of people get together and the most mediocre ideas win. This is an example of a quote I once heard. I wish I knew how I could ascribe it to. It said, "Search the town and search the cities. You'll find no statues of committees." And it's funny, and it's also true. Most of the time, individuals come up with better, more unique and original ideas than groups do. But there are ways to structure groups so that you get the benefit of individual wisdom and ideas and creativity, plus you get the input and buy-in of a group of people. That's what I'm going to share with you how to do here. By the way, I created a white paper over a decade ago called The Perfect Brainstorm. And it was all about how to manage group conversations and brainstorms. And actually, I have a video about it that you can check out too, which gives you a very specific process to follow. I'm not going to take you through my specific process. Instead, I'm going to take a more general approach, and instead of focusing just on brainstorming, how to facilitate a group discussion. All right. But if you're interested in brainstorming, go check out that other video. So what does a group facilitator do? Well, in my opinion, and based on my experience and my homework, I believe that the job of a great facilitator is to keep the conversation on track, to make sure that it reaches a successful outcome, to enforce the guidelines by which you'll be doing the conversation, to enforce the values and the standards of the conversation, and to ultimately be responsible for the outcome of the whole conversation. So what makes a great facilitator? Well, the first thing is you've got to be really clear, what is a successful outcome? Remember, begin with the end in mind. You want to set the intention. Now, you may be the actual person organizing and setting the intention, or you may be hired by somebody else to do it. But either way, your responsibility is to make sure that there is a clear intention that you will be trying to achieve through this process. The second thing a great facilitator does is designs a structure and an outline for the conversation. So in my brainstorming guide, for example, I shared that a great facilitator sets the welcome, sets the tone, establishes the timeline, establishes how much time will be available for each thing that you're going to do, and comes up with the overall run of show is another way to put it. Like, how are you going to execute this conversation? And by the way, before I keep going, I do want to take a moment to invite you to please like this video, subscribe to my channel, maybe even shoot me a note below. Let me know how this is landing for you. The third thing you might be asked to do as a facilitator, although not always, is to gather the people. And when I say gather the people, I not only mean inviting the people to the table, but also enrolling the people in the vision and in the intention of the experience. So you might be reaching out to people by email or by phone and inviting them to participate in this activity together. And in order to do that, I suggest sharing the vision that you've come up with and the intention for the meeting so that people understand why they're doing it and what the value of it is. The next thing a great facilitator does is establish the ground rules for how it's going to work. here's how we're going to do it. We're going to take turns, or first everyone is going to go and come up with their own personal brainstorming list, and then you're going to bring it to the group and present it. Or you're going to break up into teams, and the teams are going to do this. A great facilitator establishes the guidelines of how this is going to go, and also the guidelines of behavior. So, for example, one of the things that I learned early on is that in a brainstorming session, people can sometimes forget that the goal is to brainstorm and come up with a whole bunch of ideas. Someone will come up with an idea and will throw it on the whiteboard, and then somebody else will say, but that'll never work because of this. So one of the guidelines that I set at the beginning and that I gain agreement for from everybody there is we will not edit these ideas in process. No quashing of ideas. And I write it on the board, no quashing, and everybody agrees not to quash. And that way, when the idea comes up and somebody tries to shoot it down, I go, hey, remember, no quashing, got it? And I do it in a way that's positive and uplifting. I'm not like, angry at somebody. And so that's what a great facilitator does. They enforce the rules and the guidelines that they've set while also maintaining an uplifting and inspiring environment. Now, I'm going to take an aside here and say I think it's really important and powerful and effective to come up with a set of written guidelines in advance, lay those out for everybody, gain agreement on those guidelines, and then print them out and place them in front of each individual. For example, no quashing. One of my guidelines that you feel free to borrow is that we don't use the word should. We should do this. You should do that. I try to edit out the word should from our vocabulary, because I feel like it brings the energy down and it creates a different kind of vibe than what I'm trying to accomplish. So another thing that I do is I let people know that every idea is a good idea, not because it's the right idea or the one we're going to use, but because every idea can lead to another idea. And I even share an analogy of a bonsai tree. Like a bonsai tree has to grow before you can prune it down and turn it into something beautiful with a gorgeous shape. If you start to prune it too young or too soon, it might never grow big enough for you to create something beautiful from it. It's very similar to brainstorming. You don't want to edit too early. So I highly recommend coming up with some communications guidelines, some behavior guidelines that people agree to up front. That's something that a great facilitator does. And then finally, as a facilitator, you're facilitating the conversation. That means you're like the referee. You're calling on people. You're letting people know, hey, let's let so-and-so have a chance to share. We haven't heard from this person. What are you thinking? What did you write down on your list? Your job is to make sure that you are cultivating the wisdom of the group and that you're bringing forward the best ideas, that you're enforcing those guidelines, you're looking at the time, making sure that you're starting and stopping, that you're getting everything accomplished, that you're somehow capturing and synthesizing the ideas, whether that's you doing it on a whiteboard or somewhere else, or you've hired someone, this is what I do, that's just there to listen and capture and organize the notes. And then, of course, one of the things that you're going to do as a facilitator, sadly but true, is you're probably going to have to manage issues and problems. You're going to have to deal with personalities. You're going to have to deal with breakdowns. She doesn't listen to me. You always do this thing. That's part of your job. And that's why I recommend making sure that you show up energy rich so that you can be your best self. And that'll help to create a coherent atmosphere that other people can align to, that other people can entrain to. Your energy sets the tone and the tenor of the group discussion. I hope this was helpful for you. If you want to turn your business into an opportunity to do.
Yeah, I think she's got some lovely things to say, and it really reflects the list of points that I had earlier. So I've just got a few additional thoughts, and then we can chat about it. So obviously she was referring to managing all the different personalities, and of course you could have someone who talks a lot. You could have someone who's very opinionated and is not accustomed to listening to other people's opinions. And equally, you could have someone who's very shy or someone who's disengaged. Within the context of our end of life work, we could have someone who's grieving. You know, we've had that in some of our training groups. People have been drawn to do end of life work because someone close to them has died, and that all the kind of the aftermath of that, and all the work of being the executor has inspired them to feel they don't want anyone else to experience that, or they want that to move into this kind of work based on that experience. But some people have come in a quite a raw state of grief, and you might find the same. Um, you might have someone who keeps going off topic. You could have someone who's rude or inappropriate. Um, and they might not intend to be rude. You know, again, within pigs, because we straddle different countries and different cultures, sometimes things that are acceptable in one are not acceptable in another. So in the UK, it's probably not as offensive to swear as it might be in the US. Uh, so so we've had a few comments back that the amount of swearing amongst the trainers is not okay, from American participants. Uh, so you know, you could have those kind of things that you're dealing with. Um, I once, a long time ago, I participated in a 2-day workshop on preparing for your death, and it was run by a psychotherapist, and there was lots of kind of exercises around preparing for death, like imagining you're in your last hour, and there were a number of participants who had a very strong fear of death. So we might imagine that people wouldn't join an end of life planning group if they were very afraid of death. But who knows? They might do. You know, I don't know why these particular women participated in this workshop. I mean, perhaps they were intentionally trying to get over their fear of death. But it meant that within the group, the facilitator had to find other things that they could do, because sometimes they just could not participate. It was too distressing. Um, so it's worth just having a few thoughts around how to handle a situation like that. Um, End of life planning can be overwhelming. And so again, just thinking about how can this best be handled. You know, I was really aware of that last night with my group. They just looked so bamboozled by the amount of work that creating a comprehensive end of life plan entailed. And I came away thinking, how could I better support them, or to present the work in such a way that it feels much more doable, so that they feel excited about doing it rather than just completely floored by it. Um, and then from a business side, to consider how much time is spent managing the group outside of the group sessions when you're thinking about pricing. Because obviously you've got more people to email, you might be dealing with different issues in between group times. And I was prompted to think about this because a grief recovery method colleague had been, she was working with clients who'd been referred to her through the NHS. So they hadn't necessarily gone online and found a grief recovery method specialist and were paying for it themselves, in which case you get clients who are highly motivated to do the work generally. These were people who'd been referred, so their motivation was slightly different. Their need was very, very high, which is why they'd been referred. But their motivation was a bit more ambivalent. So she was charging almost double what she would for her private clients, because she said it took double the amount of work to bring those people along the program. So that sort of thing, you know, these subtleties of working with groups and working with different groups is something to really think about when you're thinking about how to price a group. So that's my little presentation. Any thoughts on that?
Can I just ask a question, Rachel? The speech bubble that talked about communication chain, is that kind of methods of communication like email or WhatsApp, or what does that mean?
Oh yes, did I miss that one?
I did.
Yes.
If you didn't, I missed it.
So I was thinking, when I put that, I was thinking, yes, like, you know, sending an email prior to the group, setting out what the group's going to be like, or what your expectations are, and then maybe sending out a summary after the group. And you'll notice that I'm completely rubbish at doing that with you guys. Like, I have every good intention. So So what can you do to best support yourself? And that might be to have pre-prepared emails that you only need to fill in little bits of. And that's what I'm doing for courses going forward, so that all the trainers have got a set of emails with all the core information. Again, I've just been thinking a lot about overwhelm, how to open this this door onto this vast subject without causing overwhelm, and that might be to sort of drip feed the information in emails. Or you could be available, like with my grief recovery method clients, I'm available on WhatsApp in between sessions. So, that provides them the opportunity to just get a tiny bit of support or guidance. So then they keep on track. So the next session they're ready for it, and it's not a wasted session. Cora, did you facilitate groups as part of your psychotherapy?
Yes, and I facilitate, excuse me. I facilitated at the hospice, so they had a group for children, and I facilitated the adults in that. And I have a really different kind of viewpoint on facilitating. So some of the things I wrote down was that this has to be built on. So if I was running a group, the first thing I would do, the first group would be introductions only. So what you want, what you need, what you're going to give, and what your motivation is. So those are the 4 things that I would ask them to do. Then I would start with my personal story. And in doing groups, I've always had a talking instrument or tool. So it might be a rock, it might be a feather, whatever I remember to bring to the group would be. So that cuts down people interfering with someone else
And
talking.
would you pass that around, or would you pass it sort of across the group to whoever wanted to speak next?
So it's kind of popcorn. So what I do is first person that wants to talk would be me. And then whoever wanted to go next. And then that person would suggest someone else, or someone else might put their hand up. So it varies. I like to think that the group has more control than I do, although I do have the control, but it's to give them control that they may not have to talk about death or grief outside the group. So if they have that, in my mind, that control in the group, then it gives them some more freedom to talk about it. So then I like this idea of pre-prepared emails. I've never done anything like that. The ground rules, what do I think about ground rules? I think I would establish it in the first group. This is the very first group that they're in. And what else have I got here? And kind of setting, so in the one group I had an Asian woman who was supposed to help me facilitate, but kind of spent her own time talking about it. That's the one thing I have difficulty with, is stopping someone. But I've learned that sometimes, and the group seems to be okay with it, not with this particular woman, we found a way of doing it because I had a person who I could talk to. But in other groups, I have found that sometimes that person just needs to talk. It might not make sense. And then just to be quiet. And I know people are uncomfortable with quietness, but just to be quiet, to kind of let the energy flow where it might, and then just say, would there be a response? And again, to me, quiet is really important in the group. And that's when the emotions can come up. People can facilitate or can think about it, because usually if there's something really dramatic presented, someone is going to be triggered. And it's to wait for that triggering. I remember one woman, and she was staunch, and she was like this, and she wasn't going. And in that silence, she just broke. And
I asked if I could hug her, and I did. And what happened is the group came up all around her and surrounded her. Brings tears to my eyes. So again, that silence to me is really important, and how to facilitate silence.
Mm-mm.
It's really, really important. I like the idea of the pre-prepared emails, although I've never done summaries. And the idea of, and at the end, I like what you do is what's your takeaway?
Mm.
So again, what is your takeaway? And if someone is rude, I'll just interject and say, perhaps you could say that differently.
Mm.
Is there a way of saying it differently? Or can I help you change it? But my facilitating is to sit back and allow the group, unless it goes awry, to allow the group to do their own kind of thing. I've never done the other things that you're talking about, and I don't have it written here. Anyway, that's what I've
Mm.
encountered
Thank
in
you.
the groups I've done over the years.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and I think what you're saying about silence is a really important one. And it takes a certain amount of spaciousness within yourself to hold silence,
Mhm.
because there's a certain trust that we need to have, and comfort within ourselves to deal with other people's discomfort. So even if people fidget a bit, or just to know that the silence has a place, um, and it can be very, very powerful. Yeah.
Also, in the first group meeting, I would set out the agenda, or whatever you want to call it, for whatever the next bunch of groups are, so that they know and they can prepare ahead of time. That's, excuse me, one of the things that I found that people found difficult. They didn't know what they were going to do,
Mm.
so they didn't come in prepared. And so that would be my first group.
Right. Mm.
That would be it. And then move into the next group, and um, that's where I would go from there anyway.
Mm. Thank you. Persis and Mythera, do you have experience of running groups?
I don't have experience of running groups. I've done when I was a kind of cookery trainer, but it's very specific because you're either teaching recipes or you're talking about nutrition. I guess some of that is kind of like group participation. Yeah, so it's kind of new to me. And I was just really thinking about it then through the kind of presentation, and also from what Cora was saying just then about how would that be for me. And I think I would have to be very clear about what I was doing. So, I mean, what came to me then was like, for example, if I was, I don't know, say I did a presentation about something, and then there were a group of people who evolved from that, who wanted to do something like work through the Jane's book together, then I would be very clear about what we were doing week by week. Yeah, I feel like it's all quite, yeah, it's all very new.
Mm-mm. I mean, as we've been saying previously, that there is an education element in what we're doing. So that will sort of, you'll be able to draw on your experience. We're giving a recipe in some ways on creating an end of life plan. We've got the core ingredients, and and then there's that additional space for people to bring their own experience and reflections. I think for me, what I found is I really enjoy one-on-one work, and I've sort of been reflecting with this as my business is evolving. So with the grief recovery work, I particularly enjoy the one-on-one relationship that you develop with someone, and the capacity for me to really lean into their experience. Whereas with the end of life planning work, I love the dynamic of the group. Um, I like this sort of, because everybody's got so many different life experiences they bring to this process of planning for death. So with one-on-one work around end of life, although you can be very specific and you can really lean into someone's situation, it doesn't have the same energy as when you're working with a group. But I find working with a grief recovery group although I do it, and I like it because it offers people the chance to go through the grief recovery method at a much cheaper rate. It's much harder to manage. It's much more taxing on me, and I sort of miss that the intensity of that one-on-one. Um, so I think, I think as you develop your own business, you'll find out, and it's practice. I've only found that out through through experimenting. And then as you find out what really feeds your spirit in this work, you can develop your business more around this. Um, Waithira, have you got any experience?
Yes, I do have some experience with facilitating groups, um, primarily discipleship groups. So there was some bit of educational and also, reflecting, and helping people see what they think about different things.
Mm-mm.
Um, I think one of the things because I think one of the things that was coming to mind for me, especially when you're doing a group, people have different motivations. Some people are shy or they don't want to talk. And so, like, I've always struggled a bit with that because it's like I want everyone to participate, and like feel a part of as part of the experience and part of the group.
Mm.
Because it almost feels like if the person is not talking, you have no idea what's going on. Like, are you okay? Are you here?
Mhm.
And so I think one of the things I've picked out is the and that could be super useful is being very clear about what the next session is about and how someone can prepare
Mm.
so that by the time they come for the next session, like really, it's not too much for me to expect that you've thought through something.
Mm.
Because I've also had that challenge of, where someone asks you a question out of the blues and you're like, wait, I wish you'd given me time to think through that before you asked, like before I had to answer. So giving that to them as well in terms of these are some questions you could think about that we'll be discussing during the next session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, and I think the issue of having people who don't talk much in the group is a thorny one, because I am often the person who doesn't talk much in a group because I'm so shy when I'm in a group setting, and I find it really difficult to know how to interrupt. Um, so I might have quite a lot to say on a subject, uh, but I find it really difficult to start. And I have a feeling, Persis, you share that.
I do, but it really depends both on the size of the group
Mm.
and the topic, and also how the facilitator is managing it. So I really love the thing that you do, which is inviting people to say something by name. So just not saying, would anyone like to say anything, but naming somebody. So saying like, oh, Cora, is there anything you'd like to say on that subject? Because it gives people the opportunity to either say everything that they want to say or to say, oh, I'd like to think about that a bit more before I participate on that question, or just to say something, have their voice heard.
Yeah.
So for me, being regularly invited to offer my opinion will really be motivation for me to offer my opinion and feel like this is a space where everyone's views are welcome. And I'm being invited into that. I love that. I think that's great. And that's definitely that's a big takeaway from me. I'm saying already that it's like something that I would definitely, that I've really noted in the past, both on this course and in other things. It'd be like, yeah, that's really helps the quieter people to really feel welcome, particularly in an ongoing group. So kind of week by week, you kind of know that that's going to come. So you're not like on the edge of your seat thinking, oh, when am I going to like, or put the Zoom hand up, and then it's like, well, yes, I've really got something to say, but if it's a bigger group, there isn't always the capacity to do that. So that kind of like the size of the group is really important as well.
Yes, and that's something for you to think about, as you plan what kind of groups you might want to host. Within the grief recovery method, they say no more than 10 in a group, especially if you're on Zoom, because you want to be able to see all your participants. So to have the right number that will fit on your screen. Yes, I participated quite a long time ago when I was in a really challenging emotional place. I participated in an embodiment practice online that brought up quite a lot of emotions, and it was being run by Mark Walsh. And there were quite a lot of us in the group, and it was one of these free things. So he didn't know who was coming to the group, but he said to me at some point, because he noticed that I'd started to cry. He said, "You can turn off your camera if you want." And I felt so seen and so held, even though it was a group that I didn't know anyone else. I didn't know him as a trainer, and it's given me so much confidence in his coaching. I mean, I've followed him a lot, and I use a lot of his techniques. And I hope to do some training with him at some point. But that one piece of being seen when I felt very vulnerable in the group, even though I was just in my own room at home, was really well. It gave me a lot of trust, and I think that's what we're wanting. We want people to trust both us as facilitators and the process that we're offering.
Risa,
Say that again.
Risa, it's just a personal question. Do you have siblings?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
No, Parisa.
Oh, me,
Oh,
Persis.
Persis.
Sorry.
Yeah. Do you have siblings?
I have two sisters. Yeah.
And where do you place in them?
I'm in the middle.
Okay. Because as the oldest person, so this may not apply to you, I've done a lot of facilitating in my family. So family facilitating.
I do mediating in my family. That's what I do.
Okay, so your role was already defined. So if you look at how you facilitate a family and kind of break down the edges, you're probably a really good facilitator. Sometimes when I'm in a group, if I see someone that reminds me of one of my siblings, I take a deep breath and go, and how did I deal with that?
Uh-huh.
And then break down the edges of it. So it's just a piece of information.
Thank you.
I mean, it makes me think of this idea of transference, and we don't need to get into all this technical stuff, but just, when we bring our personal experiences and people in our group trigger kind of responses from us, it's really good for us to be mindful of that, because we're not working in a psychotherapeutic context where we have supervision and when we're deeply trained on these ideas around transference. But nonetheless, these things do happen between people. Have you got any thoughts on that, Cora, having been a psychotherapist?
Yeah, it can happen, and all I do is tell the truth.
Mm-mm.
This reminds me of, and the moment that truth is told, it dissipates forever.
Mm-mm.
So it's telling the truth to a stranger that you're supposed to be supporting. And I've never found anyone trying to therapy me like a client, but that's my go-to, is just to tell the truth. This has triggered me. Let's take a moment. I need to take a deep breath. And this is my thought about it. And then it just, because as long as I hold it in, then the session becomes about me and not them.
Yes. Mm-mm. Yes, I had an experience recently where one of my male clients said to me, I've got the potential to fall in love with you. And, he's someone who's a similar age to me. He's got quite a lot of similar interests. So, in another life, there could have been that kind of possibility. And he was definitely testing the water, because he said, how you respond to this will kind of influence how I feel about these sessions. And it was like one of those moments, like, oh, how do I respond to this? And I decided just to respond with honesty, like you're saying, Cora, because I'd had a very difficult experience with a man quite recently, and it had made me really like invite the divine masculine into my life. And then suddenly these men were booking into my calendar. And so I said to him, well, I made this prayer that the divine masculine would come to me. And here you are. And he said, oh, what a lovely response. And it brought out something very deep in him, because he had been feeling so so kind of disgusted with himself for some of the habits that he had, and so to be considered the divine masculine, and it totally dissipated this idea that there could be a romance. And it was a really like special pivotal moment. And I really thought, okay, authenticity is so important. Uh,
Humor goes a long way. So does sarcasm. If you can
really.
hit it right, sarcasm will go a long, long way. But humor, yes. I remember I had a gentleman who was battling. I worked with his wife and then with him. And I just said to him one day, you know what? That inner child of yours is driving you nuts. And he sat back and he started to laugh and he said, yes. I said, can you talk to it? And so we developed this whole dialogue between him and the kid. And it just worked out beautifully. But, once I identified the kid, then he just understood immediately what was going on. So, yeah, and humor, like I said, and sarcasm. Sometimes sarcasm works, but I have to be really careful with that one.
Yeah, and humor is a subtle thing, isn't it? Especially when you're
Yes.
dealing with cross cultures, because something
Yes.
funny for one group will be offensive for another. So it is about really knowing your group. And I think, when you were saying, Cora, about getting your group, all the participants to say, who they are, why they're participating, right at the outset, it gives you a real feel for
Mhm.
the group so that you can sort of manage that humor side of it more sensitively.
Yeah, in my working life, I have dealt because I've worked with homeless people.
Mm,
I've worked with immigrants and refugees from all over the world. I don't think there isn't a continent I haven't actually worked with some people. And so sometimes I have a really good idea. Other times it's just completely blank to me. So yeah.
mm, mm, mm. And Waithira, you've lived in the UK, so you've had the experience of sort of living cross-culturally, so to speak. Have you been in situations where there was something sort of edgy that didn't quite work for you?
Could you reframe that for me, please?
Yeah, I was just thinking that you having lived and worked in the UK,
Mhm.
you're living in a different culture from the one that you grew up. Were there any times when humor or, something that was going on in a group didn't feel so good to you?
Um, well, not really didn't feel good to me, but like just felt very outside, like
Yeah.
very much of an outsider. Like I have no idea what's going on here.
Mm-mm.
Um, yeah, like that was actually quite a big deal because my role was supposed to be holding together that like you're in finance and operations. So you're supposed to be touching every space, but like you guys don't have you don't laugh at the same things, you don't enjoy the same foods. Like you don't have much in common. So
Mm-mm.
I can see how that was a challenge for me, and I can see how it can be a challenge. But as far as humor, um, well, some of it I got. But like, yeah, there were those other barriers as well.
Mm-mm. Mm. Yeah, thank you. I think that brings out a really important point, like making connection with people. And I really like the gratitudes. For me, that's a way of connecting because then it doesn't matter so much if we're not enjoying the same food but we can all appreciate that good food gives us pleasure or something like that. Uh, but just finding ways to create those connections that we all share, um, because it can be really disorientating when you're in a group that feels very different. I mean, I remember I was invited to a party. Um, my first husband spent quite a lot of time in Zambia. I don't know, somehow we got invited to a party at the Zambian embassy or one of the houses in London. And so we turned up on time, and it was embarrassing because we were like hours early, even though that was the time on the invitation. We just hadn't anticipated like or hadn't understood the kind of cultural context that everyone else didn't show up till I don't know about 3 hours later. So we were in this really awkward. We were both really shy and very young. It it was really awkward. I mean, it was just so obvious that we didn't understand the cultural context that everyone else just took for granted. Um, and you know, when we're working with things around death, I think it's really important to establish that kind of that human connection with the people who are in our group, so that we don't have someone who's sitting there thinking, oh, this doesn't make any sense, I don't know what they're talking about. You know, I mean, people have very different experiences around grief, or very different expectations around funeral or community celebration. um and it's easy to forget that to some people in the group, they just may not have any handle on what we're talking about. um and so
I
just,
think,
yeah, go
oh,
on,
sorry.
Cora.
I think it's also important as a facilitator that you constantly observe your group,
Yes.
because facial expressions tell a lot. And listening to what you're talking about, Wisteria and Rachel, is I would encourage people to tell the truth. A
Mm-mm.
particular, to say, if you don't understand, please say so. But also sometimes just asking a person what they're thinking because of the facial expressions might embarrass them. So it's a fine walk, a fine line as to where to go with that. But always, I kind of feel like I'm constantly circling the group. And I did some Indigenous work with called the blanket exercise, where we dealt with 100 people. And my job was kind of walk around and watch people, and often say to the person who was talking, deal with this person, or I would go in and say, can I help you? And take them out of the group. So that's a big part of facilitating, as well as talking, but also constantly searching faces and body structure.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Yes, and I mean, I think if you were to observe someone looking uncomfortable in the first session, then you might not say quite so much as what you would maybe in the sixth session, by which time the group has bonded and there's more trust within the group. Uh, and so that's part of it, because a group changes shape as the relationships develop, and trust is deepened between group members. Any of you been in groups that really haven't worked that you can think of? Because sometimes it's really helpful to learn from group situations that have been disastrous.
During my training, there was one group that we had, and no, I was as a student watching, like observing. And one of the things that the facilitator said to this gentleman was, read this book. And he just lost it. I don't want to read another book. You know what? He said, I'm fed up. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to get help. And of course, the whole group, just because he was a fairly large person, you could just see them all sitting back. And there was no recovery from that. I said to the facilitator afterwards, how would you have recovered from that? And she said, I was so shocked because he was a private patient or client of hers. And she was shocked at his behavior because she had never seen it in the year that he'd come to see her. So part of that was the facilitator's shock and not her not recovering from that. So that's one of the things that I remember. And I can't remember what happened afterwards, if he came back or if he didn't or whatever.
I was in a learning group once where the course was like once a month over maybe 10 months, something like that. There was like a whole day. And there were a couple of 2 or 3 people who really liked to share their opinions about everything that we were learning. And it really became like we had our teacher and then these people spouting their views on what we were learning. It just took up too much time. It was annoying. It was really, it just got big. It was like, I'm not here because Joe Bloggs has got an opinion about something. It's like I'm here to learn from the expert, and then for us maybe to, yeah, just have more of a discussion. But it wasn't well managed, and it became, yeah, and not as healthy a learning or beneficial learning experience for me as I would have liked. It's a kind of rare thing, I think. Usually, maybe I've just been lucky, but usually people are more skillful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because as I'm sort of like thinking back to groups, there's not many I can think of that have been really awful. I can think of one when I was training as a nurse. A couple came in to do a presentation around sexuality, and they were just all over each other. And I'd come from a very prudish Baptist background, and they were wanting us to talk about, they were wanting us to find all the rude words we could for sexual parts of the body, and so that was already challenging enough. Like the content of the session was really challenging, but then just the fact that they were like stroking each other and sitting on each other's laps, I found it just so off-putting and stressful. Whereas I think, to deal with the content that's very sensitive and is really asking the group members to come right out of their comfort zone, they needed to have done a lot more to create safety in the group, because it was just the whole context was way too much, and I felt myself completely shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
And I think, well, as well, I was going to say, I think in the end of life planning, that can easily happen as well, because we are so familiar with talking about these topics, but we could have people who are coming who have, just don't have anyone to talk to about these topics, or have not had any conversations about things. So to just be like generally feeling really easy about sharing all kinds of things, it can be quite shocking for people. I think I'm really mindful of that. Even like, talking to kind of friends or colleagues about this course, sometimes people are like, oh, that's like, oh, they're kind of just a little like, whoa, like that's something new for them. And I think that's exactly why it's good to share, so that people become more comfortable and familiar with all the ideas, so that they are able to do their own work around it.
Yeah, that's a very sensitive observation. And I think, we reflected on that a little bit previously when we were saying that sometimes it's okay to use euphemisms, because maybe you just need to begin where your clients are. I know I've said to some people that I just assume are totally okay because of the sort of the type of friendship I've got with them. I've got one friend who's a therapist. I know her through my Course in Miracles group, so we're quite sort of like, we're really leaning into this kind of spiritual undertone of our lives. And I can feel her like backing off the minute I start talking about death. And she's like, oh, that's your thing, that's your thing, that's your thing. She's like just wanting to shut the conversation down. And I found that so surprising. And I was like, okay, note to self, this is really delicate stuff. I'm touching on something that's very deep in her. Waithera, have you got any thoughts around that?
No, not really. But I mean, those are such great observations. And I really like that the observation around the sensitivity of the topic. Especially like, I mean, I guess we've talked about this sometime about culture and how death is viewed. Yeah, but like even more so here, where it's like, okay, talking about death is very, it's more like, why are you talking about morbid things? Yeah, so like that's very astute. And I was also just thinking about like in terms of the groups and dealing with kind of the different kinds of people and people who might need some extra support in a group in that sense. Like just opening up maybe 15-minute slots on a weekly that someone could book, just to help process what they're studying on a personal, because again, given the sensitivity of the subject, not everything might be easy to process in a group. So, because already you've taken a very sensitive topic that people don't talk about with anyone, and then you've brought them to a group. So also creating room for them to process some of this with just the facilitator alone, so that they get more comfortable as well, especially at the beginning.
Yes. And that's something that you could build into your program. So when you're thinking about how many sessions you're going to do, how many participants you want, you think, do you want to do like an onboarding call, for example? Like we've made the decision as the Dandelion training team that we're going to do an onboarding call with everyone who joins the course, because it means that we've already developed a bit of a relationship with people before they start the training. And we've noticed from the times when that was happening to the times when that wasn't happening, that there was a shift, and it's a much nicer experience for the whole group if there's already that bit of connection. So you could make a decision to have that kind of call, or maybe you offer one-on-one meeting at some point, that someone just has the opportunity to book in with you during the duration of the course that you're offering. And then of course, if you've already thought about it in advance, you've kind of accommodated that in your pricing of it.
What is an onboard call?
Just so before the group starts, the trainer has had a one-on-one meeting, and it could just be 15 or 20 minutes. And that's the same. That happens within the grief recovery. We try and do one just short 15-minute call with each participant, so that they know what to expect. They've already had a private conversation with you, so they can flag up anything that's concerning them. You've made sure that they know how to get into Zoom and all those practical things. And it makes a big difference. So it does add, if you've got 8 participants, and even if you're only offering 15 minutes, that's another 2 hours of work. So you need to factor that in to your pricing.
So in my practice, I had a legal document that they had to sign if they disclose child abuse, physical threat, and if they plan to kill themselves or others. So they had to sign this document that I would disclose that to the police immediately. So does that exist here? Because if someone said to me in group or even on the phone, and I've had to deal with this, that they were going to kill themselves, I immediately tell them I'm obligated to phone the police, period. And then we walked through it. It took about 2 hours before it was a situation where the woman was thinking of killing herself, but not telling anyone. I worked for a doctor, and she disclosed to him, and then he asked me to deal with her about the child, because they didn't know what situation the child was in, if she was feeling this way. So it took about 2 hours, and she did agree to phone the Children's Aid here. And then it proceeded from there. So that just occurred to me. Do we have a document that needs to be signed?
I mean, that's a really good point. So in Dandelion, we don't as yet. And it's something that I'll reflect on. With my grief recovery clients, I do make it clear that it's confidential, but within the legal bounds, which means that I would have to breach confidence if there was any kind of threat, either to themselves or others, that was revealed. It's a really sensitive subject, because what we want people to feel free to talk about is, how can I phrase this? When people are planning for their death, we often think that most people don't want to die, but some people do want to die, or some people are just tired of living, and that's different from being actively suicidal. So we want to be very, very sensitive with this. And I will come off the call and give it a lot more thought. When I worked at Brook, the sexual health charity for young people, they were really, really clear that when you breached a young person's confidence, you closed them down immediately. And because we were working with young people, we came across situations of abuse quite often. And Brooke, as an organization, had really robust and delicate policies that would support the young person to actually go to the police themselves. So someone from Brooke would go with them. So they made the accusation. So we were really empowering the young person to take control of their situation before we ran off and told social services. Because you can imagine that if a young girl, you know, she's 13, she's in a relationship with someone who's, I don't know, 27 or something, and she's in love, and it, you know, but obviously the person who's hearing her recognizes that there's patterns of abuse here. So it's a really tender situation, because if that young girl's confidence was breached immediately, she would definitely shut down, because you'd shut her down in that moment when she's sort of in this expressing love and whatever. But properly contained, you can come to see her vulnerability and that she actually needs a different kind of help. And Brooke was very successful at bringing rape allegations, which is really rare. And so they were key educators in social services and things, because they were teaching social workers how, when you just breach someone's confidentiality immediately, you can actually put them in a great deal more danger. So it's a very delicate thing. And I haven't seen it in my practice or through the work I'm doing with Dandelion and Biggs prior to that. But there are places where talking about death could have similar sensitivities. So I haven't got a clear answer, Cora.
I was thinking of, you know, when people die or close, say someone has cancer and they have a length of time to live, that, and I can't think of the other word, but they tell a secret that they've held all their life, that say they sexually assaulted someone, say it was a female sexually assaulted a male and wanted to tell her story. And that just occurred to me when we were talking about this. What do you do with that? You know, I have to think about it, and I'd like to think about it now before it actually arrives, because I've worked I worked with a group of rape victims for a couple of years as well. And so it's just makes me
I mean, I
wonder.
can't imagine in the way that I'm going to be doing my end of life work that situation would arise. But I can see that for you, with your therapeutic background, that maybe it could. But I just can't imagine that actually happening. But it did raise something else as well, in terms of, you know, the kind of, because obviously you have those kind of legal things, but also you have insurance, don't you? Whereas in the kind of end of life thing, that was one question that just arose to me then. It's like, I don't remember that ever being mentioned, like in terms of needing kind of insurance to do that work that you do need if you're a counselor or a psychotherapist, don't you?
Yeah. So with insurance, it's not obligatory for us to have insurance. And indeed, up until fairly recently, it's been very difficult to get insurance because insurers don't really know what we do. However, with the rise of death doulas and these kind of professions, it's becoming easier for us to get insurance too. So if you go into the facilitators discussion, and I think at the moment only Persis you have access to that. Michael has posted a post about insurance. So if you just search insurance on the Circle platform, that post will come up, and he's listed a couple of insurers that will insure end of life planning facilitators
in the UK or in different places.
I think he's listed one in the UK and one in the US.
Yeah, interesting. But yeah, but just going back, you know, it's like I really can't imagine having that kind of conversation with a client, Cora.
So what I've said for our graduate facilitators is that the training team will offer supervision. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you have a difficulty with a client, you can come to us as a team of more experienced facilitators. And so this would be an example. You know, within Brooke, what we would always say is if there's ever like one of these kind of areas where it looks as if a breach of confidence is legally a requirement, come to your seniors to talk about it, because there has to be a kind of process. And you know, you can use the Dandelion team to come to with these complex questions. I mean, within the grief recovery method, our protocol is if someone says directly they want to kill themselves, then we advise them exactly as you said, Cora. We're going to have to call for help for you. We're going to end the call now, and I'm going to get help for you. It's just very clear. But if you're in a sort of a grey area where someone's kind of talking around death and sort of a longing for death, or they're curious about going to Switzerland, but maybe they just do it at home, or, you know, you could have someone just kind of like talking like that, and you can't work out, are they thinking of killing themselves now? Is this something I'm becoming kind of implicit in, you know, complicit in? So if you've got any situation like that, just shoot me or Michael or Diane a message, and, you know, we can put our heads together and think about it. Because I think for the most part, you wouldn't need to call for help. You know, I think most situations don't require that level of external emergency intervention. But nonetheless, as a facilitator, you would want help to navigate that with your client. And that's what we're here for.
I think also to educate yourself, if someone says, you know, I'm going to kill myself, there's 3 questions you ask. Have you done it before? What is your plan?
I wouldn't
you,
ask those questions.
Then you need to find, then you would
But I
need
really
to get
can't
help.
imagine. I can't. I mean, I can't. If someone was like Rachel was just saying, was kind of like talking around it, then I might say something. If I felt concerned, I might say something like, what kind of support do you have available? Are you talking about this with your friends and family? It's like, who knows how you're feeling about this? I might say that kind of question to kind of fill it out a bit more. But I just can't imagine somebody just saying that to me in a professional where they've come to me for end of life planning, and I just can't imagine that scenario. But I mean, yeah, I would take that as an emergency. I'd be like, oh, I think we're in an emergency situation here.
I think it's very rare. I think it's rare.
Yeah.
But I think it is something worth having reflected on. And I think those 3 questions, Cora, they're the ones that if you do any kind of suicide prevention awareness, I did a course recently. It was just a day course. What was the 3rd question you would suggest, Cora?
So have you done it before? Do you have the means? I can't remember what I said. Have you done it
Have you a
before? Do you
plan?
have the, what's
you
your
a
plan?
plan?
Yes. Those are the 3 questions.
I think then you get clear whether if someone's got a plan. I mean, I remember a friend saying that she felt that she was suicidal, and she told her doctor that she would walk into the sea. And the doctor said, "You wouldn't." Something like that. He was so dismissive. She was like, "That's my plan." Anyway, she didn't walk into the sea. But she was upset that she hadn't been taken seriously.
Yeah, Bruce, I think you're right about where I go because of the 35 or 40 years of experience and where you would go. And so it's a good reminder. But it's still just cautionary. You never know, regardless
I mean,
of
so, like when I was doing a catering training for a project that was for Brighton Housing Trust. So all the clients I was working with were people who had a history of homelessness. And they were all allegedly at a stage where they were housed and they were ready to be returning to the job market. But for example, I had one young man who was super keen on learning the skills, but his girlfriend was regularly cutting herself. So she would phone and he would be like, "Oh, I've got to go. And he would just rush off to help her. And then one day he told me that he had a friend staying with him who was using heroin in his flat. And this is somebody who used to be a heroin addict. And I was like, okay, now I have to take action now. It's like, you know, does your support worker know this? I'm going to phone your support worker now because I don't think that's a safe environment for you, and it needs to be addressed. And I'm here. I'm the one who's going to help you now because I'm the one that you're saying it to. So this is what we're going to do. And then I phoned his support worker. They spoke together, la la la, and then it's kind of out of my hands. But I was like, I haven't had any training to do that, but I could see where my boundary was, like what that I had to take some action, and I wanted to take some action, but I couldn't take. There was a limit to what action was safe for me and would have been viable in that working in my work there. So yeah, so I feel like I'm quite sensible, and I'm also very. I don't want to leave somebody in the lurch. I want to know that somebody else is involved. I don't want to take the responsibility myself. I guess that's what I'm saying.
It sounds like you have good common sense, which is really important.
Thanks.
And just that's reminded me of something that, when we're working online, something could happen to someone. A friend of mine, she fell during lockdown. She was participating in some kind of online exercise class, and she had an older lady. She had a really nasty fall, and it was fortunate that the instructor had an address for her so that she could organize an ambulance to go and help her. And so it might be worth having in your application form a space for people to put their address, even though we're working online, just so that if you did need to get some help for someone, then you've got the possibility of doing that. Because if someone had a heart attack, on a call, you'd want to support them, and you'd feel really vulnerable yourself, and be really helpless if you didn't know where they lived to send an ambulance. So we're talking about extreme situations, which rarely happen, but it is worth just having had a little think about it and putting in place things so that you could act sort of more lightly. And an emergency contact. Yeah, Waithira, that's true. So we're reaching the end of our time. So maybe we'll just round up with the things that we're taking away. Waithira, do you want to start us off?
I don't know where to start. But I think I am grateful that this is a group session, because of the different perspectives we get to hear, and also that we see how you run it, right? So as much as it is a facilitator's training, it is also this is how you do your own EOL. So I think this is super valuable. Yeah, and I guess just the different contributions around how to run a group, things to be aware of, has also just been very like mentally, it's just got me thinking a lot around what I would want to do for group sessions, because I think I've mentioned here that I would like to also just run some informal death cafes. So that's also super useful for that as well. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Persis, Cora, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you. Cora, what are your takeaways?
So I think in my introduction, one of the things I would do is talk about comfort zone. Like in other groups, it was all the same, but they weren't dealing with death. They weren't dealing with the end. So comfort zone would be a really important key. And I would ask them to have a discussion about it and perhaps add a number to it. So is your comfort zone between 1 and 10? What would your and then that kind of gives me an idea of how to approach when a situation comes up. This onboard calling fascinates me. It'd be a good way. When I had my practice, I would never leave a person in a lurch. So what I would say to them is, from the time that I see you next, from now till the next time, you have 1 10-minute session free. And then if it went beyond that, then we'd have another one. So that would be a thing. An exercise on death. Now that fascinates me. What does that mean? Something to think about. and this summary. I'm not sure about that, but it's something I'd like to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a lot of others, but those are the four most important things I think today.
Thank you. And Persis.
I think for me, it's really what I was saying earlier about inviting people to share and participate in the group. And then really about thinking about the kind of size of the group. And I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? It's like how you can run a group in a way that really allows people's emotionality to be there, or you can run a group in a way where you're really focusing on more practical things and the emotionality is more of a background thing. So it's not you're denying it, but it's like, we have tasks that we need to do. It's like our task is not to, I mean, the same like with a death cafe, that it's really not for people who, it's not about grief. It's kind of like this really clear that death cafes are not about grief. So if people are bringing lots of grief, that may not be the best forum for them to be exploring what's going on for them. So it's kind of like, so I think for me, it's really thinking about all of those things, about how to present what my offering is and make sure that people are really clear about understanding what they can get from it and what it's not for. kind of
Yeah,
thing.
thank you. I think, Cora.
I had one more thing that I'd forgotten that I do. Usually after a client, I would write them a letter. Like when they were finished, I'd write them a letter. And the comments I've had back is some of them carry that letter with them as a reminder of what they had accomplished. So I think that's something else, depending on the size of the group and the people. Might not everyone, but I would definitely write an end of group individual letter.
Thank you. Yeah, I think my takeaways are how much I enjoy end of life planning groups. I think there's like so much vitality in these discussions, but also that it's important to think about those rare emergency situations so that we have some preparation without sort of catastrophizing the possibility of these things, but that just we've got some thoughts about it and thoughts around insurance and those practical things. And next week we're going to look at finding your voice within this work. And I think you were speaking to that, Persis. Who are you going to serve, and who is your work not for? And I think it's really helpful to be clear on who it's not for, because then you can serve those who it is for with much more focus and much more energy. So we'll think about that a bit next week and just try and bring together some of these different models and the different ideas. We'll see what comes up. So I wish you a lovely week. Really nice to see you all, and I'll see you next Tuesday. All righty. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.